Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. From Boundary to Bear Lake, Fremont to Payette, Oahe to Oneida, there are interesting people, places, and histories in all of Idaho's counties. And Idaho Matters wants to share it with you with stories from all 44 counties that make up the Gem State. Email your ideas to idahomatters@boisestate.edu or use the Talk to Us feature in our app, available on Apple and Android, and tune in each weekday at noon for Idaho Matters. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Gaudette. You're listening to Idaho Matters. It's Friday, which means it's time for a Reporter Roundtable. We will spend the next hour getting you updated on the news that made headlines this last week. And our panelists today, Alex Brezzi with Idaho Statesman, Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News, Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler, a reporter with the Idaho Statesman, and Sydney Kidd with BoiseDev.com. I want to welcome all of you to the program. And Laura, I want to begin today with you with some news that immigration arrests and detentions have risen sharply here in Idaho in 2025. So can you begin by telling us how much of an increase we've seen?
Yeah, so in the first 6 months of this year, arrests were up over 700% from the data that I looked at from ICE, and detentions were up about 54% in that same time frame from last year.
And Laura, where are these numbers coming from? And can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I looked at data from the Deportation Data Project, which is a collaboration with academics and immigration lawyers. And basically, they just collect data from ICE through Freedom of Information Act requests, FOIA requests, and they make that data publicly available through spreadsheets. And I basically got to comb through very large spreadsheets and look for Idaho-specific data.
And Laura, my understanding is that you spoke with a Boise-based immigration attorney about these numbers. Can you talk to us about what he had to say about these arrests and holds?
Yeah, I spoke to Chris Christensen, and he's been doing this for a while, and he said that his office is getting a lot more calls, a lot of times from family members of people who have been detained. He's also getting a lot of calls from folks who are, in the process of becoming legal citizens or getting their green card, and they're worried that might get interrupted, or people who already did go through this process and they're just worried that maybe that would get revoked. They're just hearing a lot of information about this increased enforcement, and he's just been getting way more calls in this area kind of all around.
So, Laura, one of the things that President Trump campaigned on was that, of course, there would be more arrests, but it would be of immigrants who had criminal records. So, with the data that you have, is everyone who's been arrested here in Idaho had a criminal record?
So from the data that I looked at, the share of people being arrested who have criminal convictions went down in 2024. In kind of that 6 month period that I was looking at, it was about 82% of the arrests were of those with criminal convictions. And then in that same time period this year, it was 68% in Idaho. And then nationwide, that share has also gone down from about 53% last year to 40% this year.
Mm. And in your report, you actually reported on the fact that there have been some children who have been arrested.
There was some data that I found. There were two children in that report in the arrest data in January. Roughly a 6-year-old girl and then I think an 11-year-old boy who appeared to have been arrested with what I'm assuming is their mother. It was about a 33-year-old woman who was arrested the same day around the same time. I didn't find any. I tried to match up their information with the detention data, and I didn't see any
Hmm.
record that they were detained, but they did appear to be arrested.
So, Laura, how do these numbers in Idaho compare to the rest of the nation? Because we are seeing more and more of these arrests across the country.
Yeah, so it's following nationwide trends. The New York Times reported that arrests were up 124% from January 20th, which was when President Trump was inaugurated. So, and like you said, this was a stated goal of this administration. So, enforcement is definitely trending upwards, kind of all across the nation.
Sarah, let me bring you into the conversation because folks may have seen some interesting billboards around the area since Monday. Now, Ada County Democrats say this is part of what they're calling an accountability campaign. So tell us about these billboards.
Yeah, so there are two new billboards up in Boise in the general area of the airport, and they're sponsored, as you said, by the Ada County Democrats. And basically, these billboards have pictures of members of Idaho's congressional delegation and say that this delegation has effectively sold out Idahoans by voting for the big beautiful bill, which the accusation is that it would increase the national debt and strip away healthcare coverage for millions of Americans.
And Sarah, this is fairly new tactic for Democrats. What are they hoping to accomplish with this campaign and these billboards?
Yeah, so I spoke with the county party's vice chair who said this is kind of an escalation for them and at what they see as sort of a galvanizing moment is the phrase he used. So from his
Mm,
perspective, from the party's perspective, they see that people are really frustrated with the Trump administration about policies that, from their perspective, take from the working class and give to the wealthy. And so the Democrats said that, they're hoping that this is a message that will resonate with a lot of people, not just Democrats. And it sounds like this is kind of the beginning of, as you said, an accountability campaign that they're going to be pushing this message through door knocking, posters, yard signs, and kind of just from their perspective, holding the congressional delegation to account.
mhm. I'm looking at one of the billboards because you did in your story, you can see it right there on the Idaho Statesman. And it does say $3 trillion more debt and 17 million Americans lose their health care. And also in your reporting, you say that Senator Mike Crapo disputed those numbers. In fact, he wrote a letter to the editor, to the Statesman. So, what did he have to say in regards to those numbers?
Yeah, this was a bit strange. I think he was taking issue particularly with the accusations around the national debt. And he had written in that previous letter to the editor that actually this would decrease the national debt by or deficit by $400 billion. And it was a bit strange. I asked his spokesperson if they could provide the source for that because I had the
Hmm.
Congressional Budget Office's estimates showing, 3 trillion or more being added. But I wasn't seeing that $400 billion online. And Crapo's spokesperson hasn't yet at least provided a source for that. I will say, separately reading a Washington Post article about this, it seems like some of the disconnect may be that Crapo and other Republicans have been pushing to kind of exclude the cost of the tax breaks in the big beautiful bill under the logic that they're already in place and this bill is just kind of renewing them. I saw a comparison to the idea of like renewing a Netflix subscription. You're already paying for it, you're going to keep
Hmm.
paying for it. So some interesting math
Hmm.
there, but I haven't heard back from them directly.
And I just wanted to make clear that you did mention that you got your numbers. I mean, looking at where the Democrats said the $3 trillion from the Congressional Budget Office and the Kaiser Family Foundation, but the Congressional Budget Office is a nonpartisan office. I just wanted people to know that. Sarah, have you heard from any other of the three delegates who are on these billboards and who did vote for the big beautiful bill?
No, as of at least today, I have not heard back from the others.
Okay, thanks for that. Alex, some disturbing news in regards to our former Treasure Valley High School football coach. Can you give us some background on Kip Crofts?
Yeah, so Kip Crofts, he was the former head football coach for Caldwell High School, and back in June, he was actually arrested for allegations that he masturbated in front of a 14-year-old child in December of last year. And so he was charged with a felony, which was for sexual abuse of a minor, and that can carry up to 25 years in prison. Um, and he actually took over the football program back in February 2023, but it looks like he left sometime earlier this year. We don't know exactly when, but we do know that his job was posted on the district's website back in April.
So, what prompted this latest investigation and arrest of Crofts?
Yeah, so last week, I think on Wednesday, the Middleton Police Department got some kind of tip or lead that there was a violation of his no contact order, which that's a pretty typical thing that, from a lot of criminal cases, it's pretty much like a restraining order, and that the judge had set pretty much stipulating that he couldn't have contact with the alleged victim in the case, but also any minors at all. And so I guess when police arrived to his house where he lives with his wife, officers said that they saw some kind of either like a kind of a setup snow cone operation, like maybe his wife was selling snow cones, and potentially like a daycare business outside their home. There were also two young girls who were outside the home. Um, but his attorney has actually said that, his client was like, shouldn't have been arrested for this because he actually had no contact with the children. And he actually pointed to a statement that the mother of the two girls actually spoke to in court last week, saying that, she came over to the house on her own accord. She wasn't aware that Croft was actually inside the house, that they were outside the whole time. They had zero contact with him. But the judge still said he had some concerns, obviously, because of the severity of the initial charge and just the fact that, there's this potential operation of a no cone stand. And he said, the community has a right to be concerned. So he did set bond in the case. But Crofts did bond out, I think, sometime last week.
Okay, so what do we know is next in the case, Alex?
Yeah, so he's got two criminal cases. So he's going to have to appear in court for both of them separately. Obviously, one for the initial felony charge, and then another now for the allegation that he violated his no contact order. And both those hearings are scheduled for next month, early in the month.
Okay, thank you for that. Emma, wastewater in Coeur d'Alene has tested positive for the measles. Dr. Pate was on earlier this week, and we talked about it a bit. But the part I want to focus on with you is that this comes just in time when Idaho kids are heading back to school. And Emma, we do not have great vaccination rates in our state. So can you first tell us where we stand in terms of measles vaccination rates here in Idaho?
Yeah, so kids are headed back to school this month. Some are going back next week and even more as the month continued. And vaccination rates really aren't great in the state of Idaho, especially for the MMR vaccine, which is the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccination. So back in 2019, 89.1% of kindergartners headed to school that year were vaccinated. Cut to this year, and 78.5% are vaccinated. So it's a pretty big drop, and that drop has been happening steadily over the last 5 years. It is important to note that this number is the number of kids we know are vaccinated. The rest of that gap might be families who decline to report or have an exemption. So they might be vaccinated, but they're not telling the school that, if that makes sense.
It does. So, Emma, can you talk to us also about the latest numbers in regards to this measles outbreak that the United States is dealing with right now? And this outbreak started in Texas.
Yeah, so nationwide, there have been 1,333 confirmed cases of measles this year, and 92% of the people who contracted the disease were not vaccinated or had an unknown vaccination status, according to the Centers for Disease Control.
So, Emma, why was the wastewater tested for measles in Coeur d'Alene?
Yeah, so there has been an increase in wastewater testing nationwide for the measles because of these outbreaks. So the Coeur d'Alene area and Idaho generally has been doing these tests for a while, but they just became required nationwide by the CDC. I don't know if required is the right word. They became standardized on July
Hmm.
28th, so last week. So yeah, the wastewater positive indicates that there was someone in the area who had measles. It doesn't mean necessarily that they live in Coeur d'Alene, like they could have stopped and used the rest stop. We just don't know. Um, but yesterday, the Eastern Idaho Public Health District did send out a notification that they had a confirmed case of measles. It was an adolescent, and that person was an international traveler. They say the case is self-isolated and is no longer contagious.
So, outside of that case, then, Emma, where does Idaho stand in terms of having actual reported measles cases? Because reported doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have it, it just means it's not being reported.
Yeah, this is the only confirmed case that we know of right now, the East Idaho case. So the likely case in Coeur d'Alene has not been reported, and so we don't really know um, how the measles came to be in the wastewater, if that makes sense.
Mhm. It does. And really quickly, Emma, you said that we've seen this drop over the last 5 years. So with this MMR vaccine, do we know if that has anything to do with COVID? Because even I mean, a lot of parents who even believe in vaccinations got behind on vaccinations because of COVID.
Yeah, so I talked to this Idaho's state epidemiologist, Dr. Christine Hahn, yesterday, and we're going to do
Hmm.
some more reporting on this. But one thing that she really emphasized is that for a long time there was this narrative, and there was a now debunked study that the MMR vaccine could lead to autism. And
Hmm.
like I said, that's now been debunked. But alongside that messaging, there was also the messaging that the measles had been eradicated in the United States, which basically means that there was no person-to-person transmission in the United States, and there
Hmm.
was really high levels of vaccination to get us to herd immunity. So a lot of parents, Dr. Hahn said, felt like, well, why take any risk and vaccinate my child for this thing that has been eradicated? But now
Mm.
that's not true. This has not been eradicated in the United States. Vaccination rates are dropping. And so she's really urging parents and families to just go talk to their doctor or a trusted healthcare provider about the vaccination. And it's also important to note that if you are not vaccinated, um, and you are exposed, there is still a window where you can get the vaccine. It's 3 days after that exposure and have pretty good protection. So
Hmm.
there's a lot of options out there for people.
Okay, appreciate that reporting, Emma. Sydney, a local cold storage company has been slapped with some pretty big fines. But before we get to all of that, can you tell us about this incident which happened back in 2022 that led to these fines?
Yeah, absolutely. So, in October 2022, there was an ammonia leak at Boise Cold Storage down on 15th Street. And it released about 400 pounds of ammonia into the air in a period of 24 hours. And this caused evacuations of the area. It caused road closures because if you have exposure to high amounts of ammonia, it can cause burns to the skin, eyes, throat, or lungs. So this happened a couple years ago, but now the EPA has come out and issued some penalties for it happening.
So, can you tell us about that EPA investigation and what the violations were that they found?
Yeah, absolutely. So, with an ammonia leak, the
Hmm.
EPA requires certain amounts of reporting to be done. So the company responsible has to call local and state health authorities as well as a national reporting center. And in this report, they found that Boise Fire Department was actually the one that alerted the local and state authorities about what happened, that they never received an alert from the company. And it also said that when when you have an incident like this, you need to report it immediately. And this incident happened like in the early hours of the morning, and Cold Storage did not notify the National Response Center until 2:40 p.m.
Okay. So
So that
tell
was
us.
some of the problems. And then the other issues that they had were Boise's Cold Storage, its old owners weren't reporting that they were carrying over 500 pounds of ammonia and sulfuric acid.
Oh,
They're required each year to report that, and I think it was, yeah, 3 years that they didn't do that. And so they also were got in trouble for that.
okay. And you noted these were the former owners, so there are new owners now. But before we get to that, so what is the fine that they will need to pay? And do the new owners pay this, or the old owners, or do we know?
Yeah, I don't know. I assume because it's the company that's been penalized
Mm-hmm.
for it, that it's just gonna, be those owners, but we don't know for sure. The penalties are significant though. They have to pay $74,500.
Wow. Okay. Any other you know, penalties, fines, or is this the settlement that they will pay this money and move on?
Yeah, this was what was put in as the a penalty amount in those settlement documents. So I believe this is the only penalty that they're facing. But I say only penalty. It's still pretty stiff.
Yeah, it is. All right. Appreciate that update. Laura, Idaho's child custody laws could possibly be changing. Can you tell us about this legislative task force that's decided to wade into this issue?
There is a new legislative task force on child custody and domestic relations, and they're scheduled to meet pretty much every month until the legislature comes back into session. And they're looking at how the law stands now, kind of how the process works, how it's being interpreted by judges, and they're looking to see if there are any recommendations that they want to make things clearer or make this process work better for
Hmm.
children and parents.
So, Laura, did they give any indication as to why they decided to take up this issue?
Yeah, so the task force is co-chaired by Senator Tammy Nichols and Representative Heather Scott, and they both said that they and other lawmakers have received a bunch of complaints from parents going through this process or other people going through this process, and a lot of people are unhappy with the decisions that are being reached or with the way that the process has played out, the fact that it can take a really long time, the fact that it can take a lot of money sometimes. So they said that they're trying to figure out if there are any changes that need to be made.
So, Laura, the group has met twice so far, I believe. And in their second meeting, there was some criticism about Idaho's parental consent law. Can you remind us what this law is?
Yeah, so the legislature passed this law and it went into effect in 2024, and it uh, basically made it so parental consent was needed for almost any type of medical care. And it also made it so that parents could have access to their minor children's medical records. And there are a few exceptions in these cases, but it took away kind of any exceptions there used to be where, you know, children, teenagers of a certain age could consent to certain types of care under the law before.
Hmm.
Um, but there was some talk from child advocates who kind of work with victims of child abuse, and their concern is that testing isn't being done for, like a sexual assault of a minor child, and if the person who might have done it is the parent, then asking for parental consent kind of presents a challenge. There was some
Mm-hmm.
disagreement among some of the representatives and the folks present at that meeting. But this is an issue according to some of the people that work in this field.
Okay, and they're saying then if you look at some of these complaints, it could be that our parents getting custody of their children who may be abusing their children. However, with this new law in place, it's hard to investigate something like that. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so with this task force, are there certain laws that they're hoping to change? I do know you talked about kind of like judicial oversight as well.
Yeah, the task force members asked a lot of questions. They talked to a couple judges and other people who work in this area about who who's overseeing the judges' decisions. Um, Basically, if there's some right now, if there's kind of a question over a judge's decorum or their ethical practices, that can be a complaint to the Judicial Council. But if the complaint is about the decision and that was made or the ruling that was made, then that can only really be challenged with an appeal.
Mm.
And I don't know if that's something they could change, but it was something that they were asking a lot of questions about.
So, as you mentioned, they're supposed to be meeting every month until the legislature comes back into session in January. Do we know what could happen after that? I mean, what can this task force actually do, I guess?
So task forces can't bring legislation, but they can bring recommendations. And I talked to Representative Scott, and she said that their intention is to come up with some recommendations. Um, Her ideas were maybe about mediation or
Mm-hmm.
other types of things that could maybe add clarity to the law. The legislature has to be careful here because, the judicial branch is a co-equal branch of government. They can't necessarily um, overstep their authority there. So
Mm-hmm.
they've made it clear they're not trying to question individual judges' decisions, but maybe make it so the law's being interpreted the way that they intended to.
Before we wrap this up, can I ask you one more question about a part of your reporting in this, which I found very interesting, and this is that a lot of parents represent themselves in court. And speaking of laws, talk to us about how the legislature this last session actually may have, in some ways, hurt parents who are looking to keep their parental rights because they basically remove the right to a public defender for parents who are facing termination. Can you tell us a little bit about this change in the law? Because what this puts us in among only 4 states that don't guarantee a right to counsel when it comes to parents facing termination.
Yeah, so that law came out of a bill that was really meant to clarify the duties of the Office of the State Public Defender. Um, it was supposed to, kind of show this is exactly what we work on, and make sure
Mm-hmm.
that their caseloads had kind of proper management. Um, there was some differences in interpretation of that law, but there were advocates who have very strong concerns that the way it's written, it pretty much makes it so the state public defender does not have, like, they can't represent parents facing termination of parental rights. And the public defender's office has said, well, we're supposed to be focusing on criminal defense. This is a civil issue. But
Mm.
there are other folks who are really worried that, like, some parents in a custody case might have access to the resources for an attorney while others don't. And what do those parents do in that case? And I think that's still a question.
Right, and that really makes the playing field so uneven. We'll appreciate that reporting on all of this. Sarah, you recently spoke with numerous Idaho business owners who say tariffs are overwhelming them. In fact, one business owner you spoke with said, quote, "We're barely hanging on." So can you start by telling us about the impact of these tariffs on Idaho businesses just this year?
Yeah, let me actually start with a clarification because I saw we had some confusion in the comments of this story. So,
Okay.
tariffs are often framed as being imposed against other countries, but the way that actually plays out is that they are imposed on goods imported from those countries. So the bill is paid by whoever is importing the goods. So if an Idaho business is importing magnets from China, the Idaho business is the one paying the tariffs. So to actually answer your question, we looked at data from the first 6 months of this year. January through June, and in that period, Idaho businesses spent $67 million on tariffs, which is 150% more than the same period last year.
Okay, so Sarah, tell us a little bit more about how some of these businesses are being impacted because you talked with quite a few small business owners, and I mean they're paying these tariffs, not the other countries.
Exactly. So I'll use that same magnets example. I spoke with Joshua Hartung, who is the CEO of a small business in Moscow that produces tool belts. And one of the important things that they need for this product is these strong magnets. They have looked into making them in the US in the past. It would be a really big environmental challenge, and it's not really possible to make them here. There's not really a secondary country they can get them from. So they're kind of stuck buying these magnets and importing them from China. Earlier this year, the Trump administration announced 135% tariffs on Chinese goods, including these magnets. So Hartung had, for example, had paid for a $50,000 order of these magnets, and on top of that was facing a $78,000 tariff bill. He said when this happened, it was like existential for his business. That's the word he used. Fortunately, that tariff has now dropped to 35%, but that's still a sizable chunk of cash for a business like his.
Hmm.
And I'll say that I also spoke to a small husband and wife company here in Boise that imports Thai curry, organic Thai curry, and they are really struggling. They're the ones who said we're barely hanging on. They are facing 26% tariffs on their product coming from Thailand, and they just don't really feel like they have room to raise their prices. And they're really frustrated because, it's not like the US had a curry making industry that they're, somehow
Hmm.
sending out of the country. They feel that they're importing a product that really can't be made here. We don't have the ingredients.
So, Sarah, a lot of people would say, "Well, you know what? This is okay because these products should be made fully in America. If we were making them in America, then these businesses wouldn't have to pay these tariffs. So, you know what? Make your product in the United States." You actually talked to these business owners about that, and I think quite a few of them said they would love to be able to manufacture their goods in the United States. But can you talk to us about the fact that we just do not have the infrastructure in this country? And it would frankly take decades to build that kind of infrastructure. And then wouldn't the price be even more potentially for the consumer?
Right. I think that was definitely a pervasive concern that came up is that, some of these business owners were very supportive of the broader idea of bringing home manufacturing to the US. They want to do it, tariffs or
Hmm.
not. That's always been a goal of theirs. But it's not something where you can flip a light switch on or off. As you said, we just don't have the factories or the machinery or the type of workers that can do this sort of work. We could have it someday, but we don't at the moment. And so at least in the short term, these businesses are sort of just stuck with this major, major tax. I thought Joshua Hartung, the CEO of that tool belt company, was a really interesting example because he has been working on gradually bringing more and more processes in-house, again, even before the tariffs. And he mentioned that, those are obviously a big capital investment. You need to buy new machinery, train up your workers, all those things. And now that big chunk of cash is going to the government to pay these taxes. And he expressed that he wished there was kind of a loophole, I guess. Either you have to pay the tariff or you have to invest that amount of capital in bringing manufacturing back to the US. That was his personal wish, I guess, because he felt like it was actually in some ways impeding him from doing what the tariffs
Hmm.
wanted to happen, if that makes sense.
Oh, right. And I believe, Sarah, in your reporting, he basically said, like, I could have taken that, what is it, $78,000, and I could have
Mhm.
built a new, plant. But now I'm just sending that money to the U.S. government, and I'm actually not able to expand my business, employ more people, et cetera.
Exactly.
So, any response, Sarah, from our representatives on Capitol Hill about this, since they seem to be fairly silent about these tariffs?
So I didn't hear anything back from Senator Risch, but I did hear back from Senator Crapo's spokesperson, who shared some comments that the senator had previously made, where he acknowledged he had been nervous about tariffs at the beginning, but he actually felt that they were starting to work in the sense of the U.S. is securing some trade deals from other countries. He does address in the comments that were shared with us the idea that American businesses may feel some pain from this. He was mostly focused on whether they would struggle with retaliatory tariffs on American products. I didn't really see him address the idea that, as we said here, Idaho businesses, American businesses are the ones who pay for the tariffs at the moment. That said, he did talk about an idea I think Representative Josh Hawley has brought up at the national level, about using the money that's coming in from tariffs at the national level to pay out to companies or people affected. I don't know that there's been movement there, but he expressed some concern about the effect on American businesses, but didn't directly address the issue we were looking at.
All right. And if you want to read the full story, go to Idaho Statesman. It is really interesting. I think all of the business owners that Sarah spoke with in this article. So, Sarah, one of Governor Little's programs is being applauded by the Trump administration, even though Republicans in the Idaho legislature have been opposed to it. So, can you begin by just reminding us what the Idaho Launch Program is?
Yeah, so this is a program. It's a couple of years old, and basically it's funding to give grants of about $8,000 or up to $8,000 to high school graduates to help them access higher education. It's particularly meant to target folks, who wouldn't traditionally have gone on to college. And, it can be spent for trade-related programs, certifications, or four-year college, but it's really meant to direct people into high-demand careers.
So, why in the world would Idaho Republicans in the legislature be opposed to this program?
Yeah, so interestingly, I heard from opponents that they actually supported the original idea of the program, this idea of helping kids who may not typically go to college get into the trades with these quick programs or certifications. They really liked that idea. But from their perspective, the program had kind of snowballed to just being like what House Speaker Mike Moyle called a welfare program to send people to college. So they felt that it was just sending kids to get four-year degrees, had kind of lost that trades focus, the speed focus, and that idea of getting people into the high demand careers.
So, tell us how the Trump administration even became aware of this program.
I don't know how they became aware of it specifically, but I can say
Okay.
that it was in the context of this event was that there was a graduation ceremony for some apprentices of a Micron program, which actually isn't directly connected to launch. But Governor Little
Mhm.
and the Trump U.S. Secretary of Labor under the Trump administration were speaking at this graduation and mentioned launch specifically as the Labor Secretary mentioned launch as kind of an inspiration for programs around the country, something she would bring back to the president. And then the governor's office was really celebrating the support, I guess.
Hmm. Okay. So, now that the Trump administration is backing this program, Governor Little is, very happy that Trump is backing this program. Has that changed how these Idaho Republican lawmakers who were opposed to this feel about the program?
That was basically our starting point, question for this story is what effect is this support going to have? And the short answer I
Hmm.
would say is no. I don't think it's really having
Huh.
much of an effect, at least based on the folks I spoke to as of now. One lawmaker said he thought maybe the Trump administration didn't really understand how the program had snowballed or what it had become, and maybe supported only, the initial pitch, much like this lawmaker had felt. Somebody else was comfortable saying, I agree with the president on many things, but simply not on this. So, given the governor's promotion of Trump's support for the program, I think that the governor's office was hoping this would kind of help rally the troops and, gain support among Idaho Republicans, but I'm not so sure if that's how it's going to play out.
Hmm. So, where does the launch program stand right now?
I believe that this past session, it was funded with $80 million that can be distributed again. It gives out grants up to $8,000 per student. And I know that there is a
Hmm.
sunset period. I believe it was after about 5 years. I'm not sure where we are in that timeline. But I spoke with Representative James Petsky, who has generally been a supporter of launch. And he was, enthusiastic about the Trump administration's support that I think if lawmakers take no action, the program would just end in a couple of years. So he was optimistic that, given this very prominent support, that may be a good sign that it'll continue on.
Okay. Emma, there was a complaint recently filed about House Bill 41, which outlaws political viewpoints in schools. Can you just quickly remind us about this new law? Because it stems from this "Well, everyone is welcome" sign in a West Ada school, correct?
So those two things kind of happened at the same time. So
Okay.
legislators this spring were looking at restricting what can be displayed in Idaho classrooms. So flags and banners, which banners really covers a lot of things. Like basically like any poster is falls under this. And at the same time as they were considering this law and discussing it, this big controversy flared up in West Ada where a teacher had a sign that said everyone is welcome here with hands of different races kind of underneath it. Um, and the school district there said that that was a political viewpoint. And so this has really been kind of a fiery touch point this spring. The law went into effect on July 1st. And
Mm-hmm.
the next day, the first complaint over a display in schools was sent to the Idaho Department of Education.
Okay, and tell us what this complaint said.
Yeah, so the complaint was over something in the Lake Pend Oreille School District up in Sandpoint, and it's this sign that has an American flag on the top, and then in the middle it says "In God We Trust," which is the national motto, and then underneath is an Idaho flag. And so the basis of the complaint is that "In God We Trust" is a religious belief and not everyone's opinion, and therefore shouldn't be allowed under the new law. But it really gets at this conflict that people have brought up frequently between two laws. There was a law that allowed the display of the national motto "In God We Trust" that had been previously passed by the
Mm-hmm.
legislature. So people and teachers were really wondering, how is this conflict between these two laws going to be resolved?
Okay, so then the state superintendent, Debbie Critchfield, weighed in on this. What did she have to say about this complaint?
Yeah, so on Tuesday, she emailed back the complainant and basically said that because this poster complies with the national motto law, that it is not a violation of House Bill 41 and can't be displayed in schools. But I do think it's important to note that there was a conference this week in Boise for school administrators. And at that
Mm-hmm.
conference, Critchfield said that she doesn't want teachers to feel like they need to go through every single display and really worry about it. She wants them to worry about whether or not the kids in their class can read. And so if the department receives a complaint, they're going to evaluate it. I would assume probably talk to the Attorney General's office, who's already kind of given some opinions on this. And then if the complaint is valid and the sign is found to be in violation, they'll send a letter to the school district, but there's no penalty for displaying those signs.
Okay, appreciate that update, Emma. I want to thank all of our panelists today, which included Alex Breezy with the Idaho Statesman, Emma Epperly with Idaho Education News, Laura Guido with Idaho Capital Sun, Sarah Cutler with Idaho Statesman, and Sydney Kidd with BoiseDev.com. We will, of course, put links to all of their stories on our website, BoiseStatePublicRadio.org. I'm Gemma Gaudette, and this is Idaho Matters.